Hello, everybody. Welcome and thanks for being here. We're at our very first ever LAC Summit. We're coming to the end of our first day and we have our keynote address with Suzie Boss. I'm so excited. We have a whole week of sharing and learning this week, and I hope that you keep coming back again and again because each of our sessions are such excellent learning opportunities. Before we jump in and I pass over to Suzie, I just want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about what this summit is all about and who we are. So my name is Emma Burns, and I am the Professional Learning Coordinator at Consilience, which is the company that runs the Learning Analytics Collaborative and is the sponsor of this event. So the collaborative is a really great opportunity for us to learn and grow together in events like the one that we're at today. And if you're not already aware, what we are is a platform and a service for schools that want to use learning analytics to improve and transform. Our mission is really to support you to build cultures of data use. And so what we want to do is help schools to use their data to make an impact. And the way we do that is that we collect all the data that you have in your school, academic data, demographic data, well-being, everything. And we collaborate with you to figure out the best way to present that data as information. Then we teach the users how to use that information, and we provide protocols and tools so that everyone in your community can gain insight about your learners. So we offer over 100 pre-built visualizations, and each of these has been customized to answer the specific questions that schools have. As you can see, we've got dashboards for teachers who want to learn more about their students. We've got dashboards for specialists who want to understand the impact of the interventions that they're doing with students. We have aggregate dashboards for admin and board, and we have dashboards for parents and students to understand their students' learning trajectories over time. We have over 50 schools in our collaborative, and we're all about sharing the learning. So when one school develops a use case or a protocol or a visualization, we share that information with other schools so then everyone can learn and grow. And we do that by publishing case studies and sharing protocols that schools have developed. We even do that by having this annual summit where schools can share their learning journeys and explain how they're developing their cultures of data use. And there is no better person to talk about that journey than our guest today, Suzie Boss, because she is friend of the LAC. She's a consultant for schools, and she's the author of many of the LAC case studies that you might have read, and especially our LAC Playbook, which is a collection of all the different ways that schools are using the LAC. So I'm excited to hand over to Suzie, who's going to tell us all about how collaborative inquiry works towards building a data culture. Thanks, Suzie.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Emma. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get underway here. Just one moment. Okay, I think are we off and running? Yes, all good?
We've got your screen, yeah.
Okay, great. Off we go. Okay, well, as Emma said, I'm a friend of LAC. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself as we go, but I'm really happy to be part of this conversation about collaborative inquiry, how educators are learning together by asking questions and sharing what they learn toward building a data culture to support teaching and learning. So I'm joining you from Portland, Oregon, home for me. My focus over the past couple of decades has been primarily about how students are learning through project-based learning, through experiential learning. I've written a number of books about PBL and have worked with schools really all around the world who were on the transformation journey of changing what school looks like and what it means when students are actually learning by doing. This photo of this young lady was my guide at a school in Colombia recently. But I've been as Emma said, a friend of LAC and Consilience, and was invited to do some thinking and some investigating and some writing about how schools were using practices like collaboration, inquiry, and reflection to build their data journeys, and to really start gathering those stories from the field so we could learn from each other. How are schools solving problems of practice? So during the summit in this coming week, you'll be hearing, I know from looking at the schedule, from a number of the educators, both school leaders and teachers, other administrators who have been part of sharing their best practices. So I'll kind of be highlighting some of those stories that you're going to be hearing from, taking a look at what we've been learning through our own research about how schools are going about building a data culture. So how are we sharing this work? A couple of different publications. Emma mentioned the LAC Playbook, which is really a place to start gathering some of these best practices that are emerging from the field. It follows schools that are on their journeys toward building a data culture and exploring problems of practice. Each of the chapters in the playbook focuses on a big question, a broad question for inquiry. We look at some trends, and then we dig deeper into examples and really practical ways that schools are building their data culture to support teaching and learning. So the playbook is one resource that's readily available. We've also been developing some case studies. So if the playbook kind of looks broadly and then takes a little bit deeper dive into some of these areas and best practices, the case studies get very granular and look at particular schools and how they're going about addressing an issue or improving their practice through their use of data and data analytics. So far, I think we have 3 of them, perhaps more in the future pipeline, and some have been published on the International Educator, so TIE online. I'll just give you some highlights of what these case studies have been about. The one from Zurich International School takes a look at a school that has built a strong data culture and is using lots of visualizations and was ready to take that next step and start communicating some of this information with parents. So building a dashboard for parents, how do they roll that out? How do they prepare to use that? That's what that case study is all about. At Oberoi International School, the interesting story of how a school leader empowered his staff to really step up and decide how to be data champions, and very much a peer-led culture there of using data to empower teachers. And in Myanmar, another case study taking a look at really how some of the leadership practices have embedded data right into the DNA of the school. And as the school leader there said, that this isn't going to change when there are changes in leadership or changes in staff. It really is part of teaching and learning and the way they do business, the way they go about supporting students and supporting teachers. So those case studies take that kind of much deeper dive into one school's story. And all of these resources are available online. And we hope that some of you who are listening will be ready to share some of your stories as well. So how have we gone about? What's been our research process? Fortunately for me, I get to start by brainstorming with 2 very smart people, Xavi and Piotr from Consilience and the Learning Analytics Collaborative, really thinking about what are those questions that we want to investigate. What questions are coming up among schools in the collaborative, and what do we want to learn more from what's happening kind of on the ground as schools are leaning into this work and really building their culture. So we start with some surveys, using some traditional survey tools to kind of get a big picture. And then from the surveys, figuring out where do we want to go deeper? What's coming up here? What are we noticing? So we started by asking questions around motivation. What's getting schools started on their journey? How are they getting, how are they getting off the ground with this? And then what's supporting them? What's accelerating and what's slowing down the journey? So catalysts and roadblocks, kind of what gets in the way. What are some of those leadership strategies that are really worth sharing? Of course, learning about teachers' professional development. How are schools meeting the needs of their adult learners to build a data culture? And for some educators, this is new territory. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Figuring out how to find those data champions and then how to really empower them. Those are some of the questions that we've asked in the surveys. And I'll share with you a little bit. What's lovely of working with this team is that then we get to visualize it. Through the magic of LAC, they can create a visualization of the data. This is just one example of how we, some of the information that came back to us from the survey. We asked schools about what were some of those strategies and structures that they use to support teachers in becoming more data literate, in building their data literacy. And you can see there's quite a range of things like classroom observations and looking at student work were very common. Much less common were things like lesson study, learning retreats. But it made us wonder, as a good visualization should, what happens in things that are not being used so often, things like learning retreats or peer learning labs. What do those look like, and how could we learn more about that? So going from the visualization to figuring out what do we want to investigate a little further, that's kind of how we've conducted our own research process. And that going further process has meant a lot of Zoom calls. We've had a lot of long late night and early morning conversations, meeting with educators from around the globe who are on this journey and were really generous in sharing their time and their strategies and their thinking. I think this is one of the real compelling qualities of the collaborative, is that there is this opportunity to share ideas with each other. And as you're breaking new ground in building your own data cultures, how can you support others along the way? So that's kind of been our process. Some of the things that came up, we were really curious in this research about professional learning. We know that this is a need for educators. If they're new to using data analytics, if they're at all reluctant in using data analytics, how do we help them as learners, as adult learners? So we found, not surprisingly, that educators start in different places. They bring different backgrounds when it comes to gathering and analyzing data. They come with different understandings and sometimes misunderstandings of what this is all about and what it says about their students. But we found across the collaborative a real strength that professional learning just about universally in the schools that are part of the collaborative are really emphasizing collaboration. They're working collaboratively, bringing teachers together in peer groups to support each other as learners, which we think is a real strength for building a data culture. Most schools do a really good job of focusing on the needs of adult learners and really respecting the needs of teachers. And in international schools, sometimes this means really attending to language and cultural differences as they're designing professional learning so that everyone feels included, everyone feels that they can participate, everyone can really think deeply in the way that they need to think best and with whom they need to communicate to build their understanding. Things like feedback and reflection are almost universally part of the professional learning experience. And a key point, I think, for most teachers who have experienced professional learning, they want it to matter. They want it to be useful, relevant, practical. And we found that that's the case in most schools, in more than 80% of schools. So these are just some of the indicators of how schools are thinking about professional learning and thinking about providing professional learning of high quality to their teachers, whether it's about data literacy or about anything. These are some of the kind of big picture thinkings that we uncovered about professional learning. And then as we dug a little more deeply into learning about data in particular, how do schools get started on this journey? Kind of what supports them along the way? Now, I mentioned in the beginning that I've spent a lot of time working with schools and students around project-based learning. So it wasn't surprising to me that starting with an inquiry mindset was a big part of building a data culture, starting with questions. I think we say in the playbook that a data culture is a questioning culture. It's all about getting that inquiry mindset going. And these are some examples of the sorts of questions that a school leader might use to get started on the data journey. These are from Peter Murphy, who is at Oberoi International School in India. And when he was new to the school, he wanted first his leadership team and then his entire faculty to be thinking about data in a really open-ended way. So he asked some questions like, what do you know about your students? What do you know about the kids that you are responsible for? How do you know if you're meeting their needs? And what informs your decision? What's telling you that? These are questions he posed to his leadership team and eventually to his entire faculty. And you'll notice that as you listen to these questions or think about them, they're open-ended, they're non-judgmental, they're not blaming questions, there's no wrong answer here, and they require deeper inquiry to really uncover what's going on here. You'd need to think more deeply and reflect on what informs your decision? How do you know if you're meeting the needs of students? And probably you'd want to know some more information. So for his school, these were the sorts of questions that got them started, just kind of setting the stage that we're going to explore these sorts of questions, and our understanding of data and our use of data is going to help us along the way. And we'll hear more about kind of what happened next as we go along here. We heard from various schools that reminding teachers of the power of inquiry, or inquiry, as many of my international school friends like to say, it is really important. And so starting a data conversation with teachers might begin with sharing a little bit of data, a data slice, a couple of views of some data that's going to matter to a particular teaching team or group of teachers, and then going through a kind of a simple process of taking a look at this, making sense of it, discussing it, generating questions, observations, or inferences. And for a lot of teachers, this is going to seem familiar. This is actually the way many teachers will begin an inquiry experience with their students. That kind of initial entry event or a hook for curiosity, getting them started about what questions do I have? What is this making me wonder about? And how can I find out more? So starting with questions, again, open-ended, non-judgmental, questions that are going to involve some follow-up, some deeper inquiry, are really helpful in the beginning of building a data culture. And so are protocols. Once again, if you're in the classroom, you're probably very familiar with using these sorts of protocols with your students. Things like See, Think, Wonder, or other protocols from Project Zero that are widely available to educators are really helpful for helping adult learners think about data. So as you hear from Carol Jordan in this comment from the American School of Warsaw, she's making the key point that matching the right protocol to the right context is really important. So what is it you're trying to focus the conversation on? What's the topic? A good protocol will help keep a discussion focused and productive, so that we're all here to investigate the same question together. It gives a safe space for investigating a question. And many schools also use norms for these conversations. So they decide in advance, how are we going to talk together? How are we going to work together? How are we going to share ideas? What are the norms that we're all going to attend to, so that we all can contribute to the conversation and we all feel really free to share our thinking and build on the thinking of others, and sometimes question others if that's appropriate in that context. So norms and protocols are something that we heard a lot from different schools. And of course, there's a variety of protocols that are useful for looking at data. Some of them coming from the world of working with students, some of those Project Zero protocols, others more specific to looking at data, the Atlas protocol for looking at data. We've heard a lot about schools using that as they get a little bit deeper into it. But just to open the conversation, something as simple as, what do you see here in this visualization? What do you think it means? What questions does it make you ask? What does it make you wonder about? Can be really helpful for getting started. So I mentioned data champions earlier, and I know I think you're gonna hear from Priya this week during the summit, which is great, because she's been one of the drivers of this power group at OAS. They call themselves the Great Ideas Group, which I just love. And this is what happens when you have a school leader, I mentioned Peter Murphy earlier, who really invites his staff to just step up and decide who's really interested in this idea of data. How would you like to bring others into the conversation? How could this help all of us improve how we respond to students and really meet their needs? So it changes that kind of invitation for the entire staff to get involved as they choose to, really changes the dynamics from top down to peer led. And the case study about OIS takes a look at how these peer leaders were very creative and had a lot of fun with building a data culture. They came up with this idea of superheroes, harnessing the power of data. They made it really fun. But I think what's important there is that made it inviting for their colleagues to attend, to join in, to be part of. It was an invitation to inquire together. And it removed any sort of can I just say math anxiety that some educators experience when it comes to data? The idea that data analysis is going to be fun and exciting and a superpower is very different from feeling like, oh, I'm not quite sure how to interpret this, or I didn't really study statistics, or some of the worries that teachers might have when this conversation arises. So I think they were really creative and smart in how they made this very inviting and kind of set the stage for some really good things to happen. So throughout the playbook, we look at different problems of practice that are coming up as schools are building their data cultures and trying to find out what are some of the common responses to those. One of them is figuring out how can we build teachers' motivation? How can we get teachers excited? Like we heard from Priya and the superpower of data. That's not always the case in the beginning. So lots of different strategies for building teachers' motivation to learn. You'll see a number of them here, but a recurring theme in building motivation is the flip side of it, and that's removing the reluctance to learn about data. So schools that have made some progress on their data journeys have really overcome reluctance. One of the key ways is by making sure that data does not feel evaluative to teachers. It's not a way that they're going to be judged. It's not, as one school leader said, it's not an accountability stick. And sadly, some schools, some teachers in different contexts that are not on this journey, they have experienced data being used in that way. Certainly coming from the US, where our test scores are sometimes tied to teacher compensation, it can feel threatening to be having school data, your own classroom data shared publicly. But in schools that are really leaning into this journey and making progress, it's not used to evaluate teachers. Rather, it's to trust teachers' insights, to remind them that what they know about their students, sometimes in a more qualitative way, the stories that they can share about their students are just as important as the hard numbers, the hard and fast qualitative data. And that it's the both together that really gives you that better picture of who your students are. We heard some teachers having to overcome the fear that their students would be reduced to a number. We heard that phrase from a few teachers. They didn't like that because they wanted to see their students as, in a richer picture, built on relationships. And so just recognizing that there may be some little bit of reticence, and then helping teachers see that there's going to be respect for their insights, what they know about their students, that's going to be really important, that they're going to have opportunities for hands-on learning and kind of learning at their own pace and in the way that works best for them. We heard some schools being really thoughtful about acknowledging teachers need to have some voice, giving them surveys. What do you want to learn more about? And just say, here's your package of learning materials about data. Instead, saying, what questions do you wonder? How can we support you as learners? And as I mentioned earlier, really addressing those needs of diverse adult learners who are starting in different places with this, who are coming particularly in international schools from different cultures and different language traditions. How can we make sure everybody's really comfortable in this conversation and that they have a shared purpose, a shared sense of what we're all about, why we're doing this? So kind of really understanding that why and emphasizing that seems to be quite important. A key practice in all of this is elevating best practices. Really helping teachers see that what they're doing in these data conversations is about empowering them. It's about helping them figure out what's going well. How can we do a better job for individual students or a group of students when something is emerging as a best practice? How do we share that? And this really gets at the need to deprivatize teaching, open the classroom doors, not just teach on your own, but again, that collective sharing best practices, letting each other kind of see the good work that's happening down the hall or across the campus. In some cases, we heard about the power of having conversations about data in very not just cross-disciplinary, but cross-grade level teams. So it wasn't just, high school math sitting together talking about this, but having teachers from different grade levels talk together could see the trajectory. How do we support students all the way through their journey from K through 12 by using data along the way? So focusing on those best practices, giving teachers opportunities and encouragement to share their ideas is really critical in all this. Another kind of problem of practice we heard from lots of folks was, how do we make time for this? We know that educators are busy. The plate seems to be always full. And I think the best example, the best strategies we heard over and over again was, don't treat data as something separate from what you're already doing. Embed it, bring it right into how you're working together. So making time for collaborative learning and protecting that time, whether it's PLCs or team planning, coaching, all of that is really important, and data can be part of that. Data conversations can fit right into those existing structures, but protecting that time seemed to be a really important strategy for schools that are making progress. Giving teachers choice. How and when do you want to engage in these conversations? Do you learn better online asynchronously, or do you want to have a small group? Do you want to, particular time to meet? How do you want to go about this? And giving teachers some choice and control over their learning time is really important. As I mentioned, building into the existing structures, that might be action research that you're doing, or your PLC times, or your team planning. All of those are opportunities to embed data right into the conversations that you're having anyways. So it just adds one more layer of understanding, analysis, thinking, potential interventions. One of the strategies we heard about from Zurich was scheduling data window meetings throughout the year, so that at particular times in the year, we're going to look at data together as a group around whatever topic we decide as a collective or as a collaborative is really important this year. So we're going to look early in the year. We're going to think about who might be struggling. We might plan some interventions. We're going to see if we made progress. So at different times in the year, we're going to look at that data again and again. And so it really is guiding the journey and helping us think about what's happening with our learners all along the way. This is a nice comment from Trina at ISKL in Kuala Lumpur about, again, the power of and the importance of embedding this right into your existing time. So for her and her team, it was really about their collaborative planning times that were really important. Another school, the American International School of Japan, teachers were already, before getting going on their data journeys, they were already using a very collaborative approach to unit planning. So they had a practice of planning units together. But when data literacy increased and teachers got more fluent in thinking about data and more aware of how they could access it, and even just what information is available to us in terms of analytics or data that's been gathered, once they were more aware of that, it prompted them to think about their unit planning in a little different way, and they wound up redesigning their planning templates, their unit planning templates, to really think about, what do we know about students' prior knowledge, their interests, what are their strengths and their areas for growth. Before we get going on this unit, what do we already know about our learners that we can bring right into our unit planning? And then at the end of the unit, of course, what's the evidence that this worked for them? How well did it work? How do we know? So the existing structure deepened and became richer by incorporating data analytics into the processes that they were already using. I think that was a really nice example of kind of building on what you're already doing. Let's see, what else did I want to talk with you about here? I think one of the areas for further investigation is figuring out, how do we know if this is working? How do we know if the interventions that we're making, or the ways that we're thinking about using data to guide teaching, is that having an effect on student learning? So what sort of evidence do we want to gather of student growth? Perhaps different evidence than we've gathered in the past, because we're trying some different interventions, trying some different things. What are teachers thinking? What are their reflections? What are we hearing from students and parents as they become more aware of how the data culture is taking shape in our school? And then, really importantly, how can we continue sharing these strategies across the collaborative so we can continue learning from each other? Because that's the real beauty of this organization, is that lots of great things are happening around the world, and there's no need for them to stay separate. We can really build on each other's thinking and create, greater awareness and potentially better ways of meeting students' needs. And meeting students' needs, I think, is really the bottom line here. As Ruth Heron reminds us, the key here is, if teachers feel like this is useful, then it's golden. And they feel like, I can make better decisions tomorrow based on something I learned today by analyzing data. It's not just a thinking exercise then, it's not just intellectual. It can really be used to improve my practice. And for most teachers, that's what they're about. They're constant learners, and they're looking for ways to meet the needs of their students. When you see that happening across the school culture, across grade levels, across subject areas, and you can see that teachers are thinking really thoughtfully about who needs support, how can we support them, how do we know if it's working, how can we share what we did, then you know that the culture is really shifting, where it becomes a very much data-rich culture, and that this is used to support student outcomes. And I know you're going to hear about collective efficacy this week from Aloha, and I couldn't agree more that keeping this going, keeping the good work going, is going to come from teacher energy, because in the long run, it's what happens in the classroom. That's where we really impact student learning. We can talk about it high level, but it's what happens in the classroom as teachers work with students, where we really have the opportunity to make a difference for our learners. So she makes a strong case for collective efficacy. I know you're going to hear from her this week. But some of the things that we're finding are empowering teachers, that are helping them really deepen their data culture, is getting to know their students earlier in the year by having access to more information about who are my learners. Those little cards that kind of identify students' strengths and their interests, just right off the bat. If you're an international teacher new to a group of students, or you have new students coming in, right away you can start building a relationship with them. Having access to information provides you opportunities to be quicker with support that students may need. It may mean individual students or a group of students who need some sort of additional intervention or support, or it may mean that there's a pattern across the school. In Myanmar, we heard about recognition by looking at analytics that students generally were just rock stars when it came to math, but not so proficient when it came to reading, that reading scores were not as magnificent as the math scores were, and they wanted to figure out, as an entire school, how can we build that? How can we, what interventions can we make all the way through elementary, all the way through high school? And then seeing that the interventions and the strategies that teachers were sharing across grade levels and content areas were really making a difference. So that support was happening for the whole campus. Sometimes the support is more focused on a particular student, but data and the collaboration with your support team, your student support team, can be really helpful if students are struggling. Just as important, you're going to have some students who need additional challenge. How are you going to identify them? How are you going to personalize learning for those students? And again, data can be part of that. We heard many educators talking about the beauty of not having to wait for the end of year data to make some decisions. And also recognizing that data is not just about academics, that it's about the whole picture of your students. So attending to their well-being, issues around equity and inclusion, along with academics, are all aspects of teaching and learning that we can get better at, by learning together. And so I guess that brings me to some of the next questions we hope to explore. These are some of the things we want to be thinking about, getting much, again, more granular. How are teachers actually using data in their daily practice? What helps them build data literacy and communicate it? What they are learning with parents, with students, what's most useful to them, kind of what's missing from the toolkit that they'd love to have. How are schools starting to share their understandings in this way with students and with parents? And we'd love in follow-up for if any of you have suggestions, wonderings that you have about, here's a question I'd love to know more about. It would be terrific. I'll share my contact information with you, or you can communicate directly with the LAC group, the LAC team. But if there are things you would like to have us investigate and learn more about, that's how we build our understanding, and how, as a collaborative, we continue to build best practices, learn together, and do better by our students. So Emma, I thank you for time today to talk about some of this, and look forward to digging deeper into these topics, in the months ahead.
Absolutely. Me too, Susie. Thank you so much. It's for me, it was really refreshing to think about, we often think about, oh, what all this data work that we're doing, what's the impact? Are schools growing? Is there an improvement for student learning, things like that? But you made me realize that for myself, the most growth I ever make as a teacher is when I have the opportunity to be a learner and practice that empathy and get back in the seat of a learner, and it makes me understand my craft again, to a whole new
Absolutely.
level. And
Absolutely.
that's what we're doing, is we're getting in the learner seat, and we're practicing that inquiry mindset in a really authentic way.
Yep.
And so that's going to have such tangible outcomes for students beyond what we're doing. Just being a learner again is gonna make them
Absolutely.
better
Right.
educators.
And it doesn't, and of course it involves, we talk about productive struggle for students and sometimes for adults as well. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's
Yeah,
definitely worthwhile when you
yeah,
see the benefits and can put these insights to use.
for sure. And I think we see that in real time this week, because every single one of those people that you quoted are presenting this week.
I know. I saw it on the schedule. I was so excited because they just have such wisdom. I was so lucky to be on these Zoom calls with them and have them unpack their thinking and, really get into the weeds
Yeah.
with some of these questions. It's great.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting to see how schools are growing in their development and their understanding, and then sharing that, as you said.
That's the key, right? Yeah.
I wonder if anyone has any questions for Suzie or any comments about the work she's doing. You can unmute your mic, or you can put them in the chat.
So I think maybe there's one in the chat.
Yeah, so Silvana just says, what a wonderful way to think about the what, the why, and the how of building a culture of data. Yeah, we talk about it so much, don't we? But we don't often really think about those pieces.
The what, the why, and the how. It all matters, right? All of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Silvana. All right. Well, thank you so much, Suzie. Really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay. And I've stopped sharing. Terrific.